tell everyone your name.
My name is Colleen Pavier.
And how many children do you have?
I have two, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old.
And is the injured child the 5-year-old?
He's the 3-year-old. Well, okay. I think probably both of them have some issues from vaccines, but the most obvious one is my 3-year-old, Ambrose. His name's Ambrose Pavier. He was born on the 5th of November, which is Bonfire Night in this country, 2013. So, shall I just start?
Well, I mean, one of the questions I always ask, because they like to accuse us of being anti-vaxxers, is what were you thinking when you were pregnant with your first child? What was your thoughts on vaccines?
There weren't. I just, it was like, didn't even think of vaccines. I remember feeling like with my first child, I think it's when there was like an outbreak in Wales of measles, was it, I think, or possibly mumps, and he hadn't had his MMR yet. And I was late by like a month or 3 weeks, or it was something quite small, but at the time I thought, I better get him his, he better get his MMR so he doesn't get mumps. I think it was mumps at the time. This was 4 years ago. And I was so glad once he had his MMR. I was just like, okay, now he's safe. It'll take at least 4 weeks for the mumps to spread from Wales to London, which we lived in London at the time. So I thought, okay, well, at least he's safe now. And he, like 10 days later, I remember he always just was like a super alert child. And I remember looking over at him. This is my what I consider my non-vaccine injured child. And he was just sitting there like in a heap, and he had his mouth open and he was just drooling. And he was staring, and I said to this nanny who used to always be in the park, she had all these degrees, she was very knowledgeable, I said, isn't this weird? He's just like, all of a sudden he's just started staring into space, and he does it at home. He'll like sit in front of his food and just stare. And she said, by any chance has he had his MMR? And I said, oh my God, yeah, he had his MMR like a week and a half ago. And she said, oh, he's just processing the vaccine. He'll be fine, it's just like flu symptoms. And I said, well, it's not really flu symptoms, him drooling and like staring into space. And she said, yeah, he'll be fine. And I remember actually sitting there and looking at him and thinking, that's just weird.
He's just processing the vaccine.
The vaccine, yeah. So I remember she was actually a really nice person, and she was looking after an autistic child very well, very knowledgeable, she actually had degrees in childcare. And I guess that was just her interpretation of my, I was worried, and she probably was just trying to put me, and that was her response. And it kind of, at the time, it put me at ease. I was like, gosh, I didn't remember that he'd had, because, they weren't even on my radar. I wasn't, I didn't put 2 and 2 together like I did with my second child. The penny never dropped. But he doesn't have spectrum behavior. He doesn't have, really, other than food allergies. Which I actually think he would have developed food allergies if they were from vaccines, which they probably were. It would have been from earlier ones, because he had a very upset gut his whole first year of his life. And there's no reason for that child to have any food allergies, because he was breastfed, he was a vaginal birth, all the things that you're supposed to do to make your kid not have food allergies. That's what I did, so.
Just before we go on to your next child, where are you from?
I'm from Oklahoma originally.
Yes, Periscope peeps, you are correct. She is American.
Okay. So they know I'm from Oklahoma?
Oklahoma, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so.
But I've lived here for 18 years.
Yeah. You got a slight sounds a little Irish to me.
My parents are Irish, yeah. So I'm blood-wise, I'm full Irish, but I was born and raised in Oklahoma, and my parents are both from Ireland, so.
Okay. All right, so you how did the pregnancy go with your second child?
It went okay. I had a birth injury from my first child, so it was uncomfortable. I had basically a pelvic organ prolapse from my first child. So, if I'm being really honest, it was pretty hellish. But as far as like my health and everything like that, that was fine. He was just a bit large. He was just a big baby. Both my babies were quite big. My husband's tall. I don't know why I have big babies, but I did. Probably ate too much while I was pregnant. But so he was born at home on accident. I won't go into that story. But anyway.
Oh, please go into that story. What happened?
Really? Well, this is okay. So what happened was I had a very bad birthing experience with my first child, as a lot of women do, and ended up with a prolapse because I was like cut open and he was sucked out with the ventouse and ended up having like a funny shaped head and all that. So I just wanted to avoid that, but I went about it in a very like rushed way, and I didn't I just basically started to panic probably about 3 weeks before he was due. He was due on the 5th of November, my second child, and he was born on the 5th of November. And I didn't want to go through that same thing where I didn't have support, and I didn't, basically what happened with my first child is I never had any contractions. I just it was just full on pain. And so I got an epidural, which is not what I wanted to do, but I wasn't expecting not to have a break from the pain. So at 6 a.m. with my first child, I woke up with contractions, and they just didn't stop. So I wasn't sure if that was going to happen again. So I spoke to this kind of famous doula woman in my area, and she explained immediately. She said, "Oh, that's because he was in the wrong position, and there are things you can do to like make sure that your child's in the right position before giving birth." This happens quite often, I think. Well, they actually thought he was breech. He wasn't breech. He was just back to back, and the reason he was back to back, and I think that's why she said, if they're back to back, that's what can happen is you can just have full on pain with no contractions. So with my second child, I lost my train of thought there.
So you got out. You were at 6 o'clock in the morning.
This is my second child. So my second child, so I phoned this doula, and she said, I can give you the name of this woman. She's like a trainee doula, but she's very, very, very good. I don't want to like get anybody in trouble or anything like that, but basically I think it was my second child, and I'd been warned by my sister, your second child will probably come very quickly, as mine did. Get to the hospital quickly. And so I said that to my husband. This kind of trainee doula was saying to my husband, no, we just need to relax. Everyone needs to stay calm. And I was like, Ben, get my bag. We need to get in the car. And my husband went downstairs and started doing the washing up. And I said to myself, that's it. I'm having the baby in this bed. I knew, because I knew the baby was coming. I could feel him coming like down the canal. So anyway, to make a long story short, Ambrose was born shortly after midnight or 1 a.m. or something on the 5th of November, his due date. So he's Ambrose, and we call him Brosy Bonfire, which is a really cute little name because he's born on the 5th of November. We moved 3 months later, we moved out to South Oxfordshire, where we now live.
Wow, go back to, he's born at home.
Yeah.
So
I was actually glad of that because there was no intervention. I had these amazing contractions where it was like just insanely, contracty and very painful, and the eyes were like rolling back in my head, and I thought I was going to die. But my friend helped. She had 2 home births and was very relaxed, and she came from down the road, held my hand. She looked at me. The doula was kind of out of the picture at this point, God bless her, because I didn't actually know her very well, and I think at that point I kind of resented her for the fact that I wasn't in hospital. But it all went well.
No vaccines is what I'm trying to get at. So
the vitamin K.
Did they give that?
The vitamin K. Well, we went to the hospital after. And from memory, I'll have to go. I was actually thinking of that on the drive down here or last night. I don't know if Ambrose was given vitamin K or not. Because again, it wasn't on my radar. I really don't know. My first child was given vitamin K, and I remember asking, why would you not? Why are you even giving the option? If it's so good for them, why are you giving me this option? And I remember them saying like, well, some people don't like it. And I was like, well, of course, just give it to him. Yeah, it's like vitamin K. Like, I didn't even know what it meant, but I just thought, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're in that frame of mind where you think, oh, once they get their vaccine, now they're safe. Now they're more healthy. And you can tick it off your list and like, I'm a good mom,
So when did he get his first vaccines?
Ambrose. That's another thing. So, all these things I remember after the fact. We moved, and I was a bit overwhelmed with my birth injury being refreshened again by having another child, having a not yet even 2-year-old, and moving to a new landscape completely. We only moved an hour away, but it was like to a village in the countryside, and I felt like we moved to the moon. I felt like we moved to like Australia or something. I was quite not depressed, just like, postnatally depressed, like completely lost, and just trying to get through. And I didn't book his appointment. I think I had to register him at the new surgery, and I hadn't done that. And finally, quite late, I'd have to look back, but I did his initial vaccines were done late, and I felt guilty about it.
Just show the Americans. This is like
the red book.
It's called the Little Red Book.
This used to be my I'm a good mum.
Yeah, exactly. That's the book that I talk about in Vaxxed. When you just have to tick everything off. Look, it tells you personal health. You've got
child, family, and birth details. It measures. You've got charts for their weight, charts for their height, which is actually quite satisfying.
I don't know if you have this in America, but
No, it would be all on the computer in America. Because I remember when I got here, I'm like, what is it, 1950? Like, but actually, it's quite nice to have a little book.
But this is what makes you want to be the perfect mum, because you think, right, my child needs all of these.
Yeah. 16 weeks, 8 weeks.
I love the way you just said, yes, vitamin K, even though I didn't know what it was.
I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was.
So many of us know. All right, so let's have a look at the immunisation side.
You just trust, don't you? So immunizations. And I think also, because I remember when I brought in the book, if you don't have your book with you at the time, they can't sign that actual page, and they have to give you a sheet of paper that you then have to tuck into the front. Because I remember like going to someone after that to see a GP or something, and they're like, oh, he's not been given his. And I'm like, he has, just check in here. So his first immunizations were late, but they were given, that's like the blood test thing, I think. That's the screening when they prick the heel.
Oh. Yeah, I wonder, do they do that in America?
The prick the heel, I don't know, that's a bit crazy that, but I don't know, that's sort of like testing for different things. No, that's something else. I'm sorry, Polly, I don't know, I don't have my stuff organized here, but he definitely got all his, I'm talking to you like you're like a GP now, he definitely got all his immunizations, I promise. And then it was time, so can I flash forward now to the...
Yeah, go on.
Okay,
so just basically, you just took him in whenever you were
took him in, and but the thing is, he didn't really have. I don't think he had any issues. He was a really healthy baby. Like he's a redhead, and his skin was just like alabaster, just beautiful, like squishy white, beautiful skin, perfection. That baby was so healthy and strong and big and fully breastfed, and I don't know, but I don't think he had any issues with the early immunizations. But I wouldn't have been looking for anything. So who knows? But so then he turned 1, 5th of November 2014, and then 3 days before Christmas, I had a friend over. This was in the evening, and I was really tired. And my birth injury had been bothering me, and that can be quite distracting. So when that's bothering me, I'm often distracted, and I'm often like not on game. And a friend of mine, her daughter, asked for a glass of water, and I had just put down 2 hot cups of chamomile tea in the middle of the table because Ambrose had just started learning to walk, and he was grabbing things. So I set them down in the middle of the table, or what I thought was the middle of the table, and I got up to get my child's friend a cup of water, and I was getting the cup of water. And I look over, and Ambrose had the cup of tea, one of the cups of tea, and he pulled it, and he was pouring this freshly poured cup of tea down on top of himself. And basically, to make a long story short, he scalded himself all underneath his chin, his chest, his arms, his everything. And because his little finger was hooked on it, he couldn't let go of the cup, even though he knew what he was doing. He was just basically like pouring it all over himself. And I went into a complete panic. My friend was like, we were just trying, the kids were screaming, everything, he was screaming, and I didn't remember what I was supposed to do, so I actually phoned my sister-in-law, who's a dermatologist, and she very calmly told me, you need to go in the bath, put cold water on him, but he wasn't having it. He was just slipping all over the bath. I should have just like held him. It was okay if he was screaming, just put that cold water on him, because that's what keeps the burn from going, basically. Mm-hmm. But I didn't understand all that then. Now I do. And she said, right, get some cold dish towels and just put it on him and get to the hospital. So I did that, and we went to the first hospital, like a local one, and they dressed his burns and they did stuff, and then they sent an ambulance, and we went to Royal Barks, and there they redressed him and whatever, and then we drove to Stoke Mandeville, which they have a special burns unit, and we were there for like 2 nights, I think. And it was by the way, Ambrose had just started sleeping through the night before this. He had just started sleeping solidly, regular, just over a year. So when he hit a year, he started sleeping through the night. So it was like a big moment for a mom, like to finally, like, yeah, hallelujah, they're sleeping through the night. It takes longer if they're breastfed, and if they're like a big boy that wants to eat all the time, takes that long sometimes. And so we spent like 2 or 3 nights right before Christmas in hospital, and they were really good with dressing his burns. They really know what they're doing at that hospital. And then we went home for Christmas, and all the little Christmas pictures are him like wrapped up. He didn't have, it was just his neck. The bad places were bits on his wrists, 1 bit here, and 1 bit under his neck. And now the only bit that's scarred is under his neck, but the rest children heal quickly actually from that sort of injury. And over Christmas, he started getting like a little rash on the back of his neck. And my brother and sister-in-law are doctors, and they said, you really should take him in, because things with children is they can get quite sick quite quickly. So we drove up to Stoke Mandeville the next day, and we had to stay overnight again because they couldn't figure out where this rash was coming from. They did all these diagnostics on his insides, his outsides. Now I would just call my homeopath and it would be sorted within 24 hours, guaranteed. Nothing works faster on children than homeopathy, and I know that for sure, especially for skin things. But anyway, I just was very confused and had lack of sleep, and they came in the middle of the night and they said, we can't figure out what's wrong with him. He needs to go on antibiotics. And I said, oh no, really? And they said, yes, it's the only thing. We can't figure out. If we could diagnose what it is, then we could treat that, but we can't, so we have to do antibiotics. And at the time, I knew antibiotics were bad, and the reason I thought they were bad is because of this resistance thing. That's what most of the public, that's why the whole gut thing hadn't really hit the press yet. Now, the past year and a half, it's all about the gut biome, and people are getting smarter and drinking kefir and things like that. But this was, 2 years ago, and so I just thought, okay, well, no, I don't want to give him antibiotics because you're really not supposed to have antibiotics. But okay, the doctors are saying this is the only way to get out of this rash situation. So for the next week, I took him home, and for the next week, I gave him this like hospital NHS issued pink, probably quite low quality antibiotic or whatever it was. And I gave it to him with gusto because I was told, just make sure that if they start it, make sure they complete it. And I understood what the reason for that was as well. And so I gave it in yogurt, I gave it in whatever I could give it in to get it in him. And I was like, well done. You did what you're supposed to do. You're a good mother. And within a week, so after that extremely traumatizing situation, he still had the burns. The burns were there for like at least a month or so, but he was healing so quickly and doing better. After a week after that scalding situation, he was sleeping through the night again. And then on the 29th of January, so that was the end of December, so like around New Year's. And then on the 29th of January, I took him in for his MMR.
So how old is he then?
So he was 13, 14 months old.
And let's have a look. Did you just have the MMR?
It's the MMR, the Hib, Men-C, and PCV.
Why the hell are they giving all this crap to these kids? I don't understand. That's horrific.
And so that night, so neither of my children are pukey kids. Like, they just never, ever vomit, like ever. Irving my first child has vomited twice. Once was like 3 weeks ago for the very first time, and he vomited and he goes, Mommy, what is this? Like, he didn't know what it was. And the other time, when he was a baby. But Ambrose never, just wasn't a sicky baby. My first baby had reflux, which was probably caused by vaccines, but whatever. Ambrose never vomited, never whatever, and he vomited in the middle of the night. And I just thought, oh, that's weird. I guess he's got some kind of bug or something. That's a stomach bug, because there was a stomach bug going around, as there often is in that time of year. And we were due to go to my in-laws. So we were delayed, obviously because of him, not feeling well, and me being up in the night. We got in the car and we drove to my in-laws. And then that night, I don't even remember what he was like during that day or whatever. I just don't remember. But that night, we were staying on the top floor of the house, and we were staying in an adjacent room. And I just heard him screaming his head off, screaming. So this is the second night after his MMR. And I went in, and oh my God, the room just smelled of diarrhea. But there was also like something else. Like, I just was like, what the heck is going on in here? And the diarrhea had gone through his onesie. It had gone through the sleeping bag, and it was like all over the bed. Just unbelievable explosive diarrhea. And I remember the next morning, and he did it twice. So that was that first time. And I cleaned him all up, and I got him new nappy and totally redressed him and redressed the bed and everything. And it happened again. And so I was basically up all night, and I went down in the morning, and I said to my mother-in-law, I good God, like that wasn't just diarrhea. I said it almost smelled chemical. And I actually remember still no connection with the MMR, just didn't even make the connection at all. And then we were back at home. This is like a week later. He was waking in the middle of the night. I remember breastfeeding him like in the middle of the night. And I looked down and he had green snot coming down his nose. And for whatever reason, it was that green snot. Oh, and he had a fever. That's right, he had a fever. So he had a fever and the green snot. And that's when I was like, oh, it's the vaccination. He's getting because they warn you that might happen like a week later or whatever, don't they? They tell you that might happen.
I wouldn't want anything.
Really? No, I think, or you read about it online. So I would have like, well, with my first child, I remember a friend of mine that I was really close with, she was due to go get the MMR for her child. See, I didn't grow up over here whenever the MMR went through the big scandal. I didn't live in this country then, so I wasn't even aware of the whole, in the US, we just didn't have that. That wasn't in the news cycle at all. But so my friend, she's like, oh yeah, he's sleeping. Oh, it's a bit scary. And I said, what's scary about it? She says it's the MMR. It's the big one. I remember saying it's the big one. This was my first.
I mean, you've had a combination of shots.
Yeah.
So you don't know that it's the MMR.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. But it's referred to as the MMR because, and anyway, so I remember going home with my first child before he got the MMR. I Googled the MMR and everything came up as fine. And I was like, okay, well, it's fine then. Little do you know, you have to like put in an extra bit of searchiness and scroll down a bit and presto, the truth. So anyway, with Ambrose, that I thought that's what's going on. He's just processing the getting the fever. It just means the vaccines are working or whatever. I don't remember what I thought. But then the weird stuff started happening. So, and it was so sudden. It was the daytime stuff. So he was waking at night, screaming his head off. But all day long, he was just crying, just screaming, shrieking. So this was my little piece of paper that I kept because the sad thing was that all these little like joyous behaviors that he had, all these little things that just made up his little day. Like in the morning, before he had his MMR, if I can call that, combo, every morning he'd wake up like at 6:30 and I would go in and I'd give him little baby books and he would sit and go, oh, and he'd look at his little baby books for half an hour, sometimes up to half an hour, so that my husband and I could like wake up and, just kind of, and that ended. That's never happened ever again since that was the end of that. And that was a morning ritual. Even after, the scalding thing, he was still doing that. That was part of him. And he used to go around the house and he'd walk. When he was happy, he'd walk and he'd swing his little arms like that. And that's how you knew that he was like content and happy. And he would say, Galdi, Galdi, or something that sounds like Galdi, 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 Galdi. And I've never heard that ever again from him. Because I thought, after all that happened, I thought that's how I'll know that he's healed, is when he says Galdi, Galdi again. But now he uses words and speaks. But it's quite sad to me that all those little things disappeared. And he basically just screamed all day. And so I thought, okay, well, he's got like a bug. Doesn't feel well, because kids act like that when they don't feel well. And then so he suddenly had like a really just noticeable temper about everything. Like if he wanted something, he would just start screaming for it. And he was never like that before. Shrieking, like this really kind of kind of shriek. I'd forgotten about it, and then like 2 months ago I went back through my old photos and videos, and there's one video that I took at the end of kind of like February, I think it was, and I'm swinging him, and it's just a very short clip, but in the clip he does that shriek, and I remember going, oh God, like I forgot about that. And it's such a brand, it's so like, oh. So that was that shrieking. And then one morning my husband and I were in the kitchen, and he came into the kitchen and he looked over at us, and I had already seen it, but my husband was looking this time, and he just started squinting with both his eyes, just squinting like quite regularly. And then in that same morning, he started banging his head on the floor, and I looked at my husband and I was like, something's happened, like something's not right. And that's when I started like, and then just to go through the rest of these symptoms. So all these things started happening. The green snot, he never had green snot. If he ever had snot, it was always clear. His bowel was all messed up. He didn't sleep. That got much worse, but that was kind of like the next phase. he started getting really waxy one of his ears was really waxy, very aggressive, red eyes, and he started sucking his fingers all the time, like, and just like really salivating, just sucking his fingers like this all in one, not one finger, like all of them together. And then the sleeping thing. Well, I think at that point I was just trying to get him to stop screaming during the day, because we had to, like, this is before my other child was in preschool, I think. Oh no, he was in preschool, but I still had both of them, like, a lot of the time, and we couldn't do anything because he was screaming and he always wanted to be on me. I couldn't, like, do the dishes, I couldn't do anything. So I Googled on this local forum, this is before I knew about Arnica or any of that, I just Googled on this local forum, because at that point I had Googled it in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., and that's whenever I discovered, I think the first thing I ever Googled was, after MMR, awake for hours at night, or for wide awake for hours at night, post MMR or something. And as soon as you do something like that, then you get all these, like, very useful. And I think the thing that came up was post-vaccination syndrome website. And I found it very confusing, and it was like they were saying that the way out of it was homeopathy, but for me, because I knew homeopathy just barely, it was very intricate, what you needed to do, the SEAS therapy. And I was like, I can't do that. I don't know how to do it. Because anytime I'd done homeopathy before, I'd done it myself. I'd phoned Ainsworth and gotten the remedies for myself. But with this, it was like very specific. You need like a certain amount of this, then this, followed up by this, this, this. So that's when I thought I need to find a homeopath. So I Googled, found someone, and she was good. But she got us out of the woods at least. So I remember that day she was away on holiday. But she said to me, what do you have? I said, I've got chamomilla, I've got pulsatilla, all the things you have to make babies sleep, I guess. And I think I had belladonna. And she said, okay, I want you to give him pulsatilla. I think it was this could be wrong, but every half hour, or every hour for the next 3 hours, or every half hour for the next 3 hours. And just that one remedy, within an hour and a half, he was sitting on the step and he had stopped crying. And I was like, okay, we can put our shoes on now. We're going to get in the car and we're going to go to Beale Park. This is like this park that I had wanted, just to take them to this park to like do something for the day. And it's like just for him, I just needed him to stop screaming. And then I went to her and we did a little, I think it must have been SEAS, but it was different than the SEAS that I did next. I didn't know much about it. And, but she didn't apply anything for the gut or any nutritional therapy or anything like that. So by chance, through my handyman, whose son was also vaccine injured, and himself, he'd been vaccine injured in the Gulf, having been given the anthrax vaccine. He was one of the very few British soldiers who were given the anthrax vaccine. And his son was then vaccine injured after his second set of vaccines. Anyway, they kind of found the light and found this homeopath. I said, by chance, do you know her name? He gave me her name. I called her, and that's whenever my world broke open. I explained to her what had happened, and she then explained to me, I think, or helped me understand that there was a link between him having that antibiotic the month before. And then we went in and we started, basically for 6 months, I just went completely militaristic. And also, thank goodness, at that point, my other child, because there's just so much to tell. Okay. So my son, we had this asthmatic cough, my other son. He'd been coughing in the night, and so the same GP appointment, I took my older son in for his asthmatic cough, for his cough through the night, and I took Ambrose in to ask the GP about his reaction to the MMR, and it was the very typical. He literally said it's probably teething, and just I know it's probably teething. I said, I know that it's not teething. I've been through teething before, but this is not it. And then for my son, he prescribed something called Montelukast, which is a powder, like an antihistamine powder that you sprinkle on their food. And it did make my older son stop coughing. And then the next night I halved the dosage and he still didn't cough. And the next night I just put this tiny sprinkling of Montelukast on his melon. And that night he had a nightmare. And so I Googled Montelukast and side effects of Montelukast, and nightmares came up. And then I said to myself, what are you doing? Why are you giving your child this weird, super powerful drug? Well, even just a tiny bit of it means he stops coughing, So, and it's given. I then Googled like how to get rid of an asthmatic cough, and Googled and Googled and Googled, and I discovered that if you got rid of gluten, that can help. So I immediately pulled gluten out of his diet and therefore out of my other child's diet because it was just easy to do. And that, I think, is the reason why my child is okay today, because very, very, very early on, I removed gluten. And we were already kind of like a dairy-free house because my older child can't have dairy. So I think in that way we were just lucky.
So describe how he is today. I want to know what
He's actually quite good. He does have a tendency to have spectrumy behavior, and that's very difficult for me because I know there's so many things that you can do, but I'm not always in the mental clarity position to be able to do all these things diet-wise or homeopathy or massage. I mean, every week it seems I learn new things that you can do to like reverse autism or reverse spectrum behavior or reverse, the what I see it as is toxicity. So I'm always buying books, reading stuff online, and just trying to think, what can I do? But then sometimes I overwhelm myself and I end up doing nothing. But his sleep has never been the same.
Still now today?
Yeah. I mean, well, we went through that. I meant to get back to the sleep thing. So we went through a period after all those symptoms started where he would be awake from midnight, no joke, from midnight till about 4 a.m., wide awake. Like, I would just have to get up with him. And that's whenever, like, me and my husband knew that something had gone terribly wrong, because it was just made absolutely no sense. Even if he'd not slept all day long, or what he started doing was having these, like, crazy naps that you couldn't wake him up from during the day. Or you could, but then like even he had nights and nights and nights of no sleep or very little sleep, and he would still wake up around midnight and be awake till around 4, and that went on for a month and a half. And that's when the homeopathy really helped with that. And we've done not a full seize, but a partial seize, which we had to stop because it brings out, like any detox, it brings out the bad behavior and eczema and all the rest. But I'd like to do it again. It's just so fascinating how it works. And
you were saying earlier you get overwhelmed with all that.
I think everybody does. Well, it's kind of something I do. I get overwhelmed with things, but when it's with your children, and it's because it's like I've got my issues. My other son has his issues. He's got some dietary issues. So I'm trying to look after him and it's hard to balance. You almost need to concentrate on one at a time. And if you're looking after yourself, it's hard to look after your children, or so I go from one to the other, but I'm doing the best I can. You just have to be easy on yourself sometimes.
All right. Well, so have you stopped vaccinating?
Hell yeah, no, my children will never be. I wish I just could go back in time, and that none of my children should never have been vaccinated. Never. Neither one of my children should ever have been vaccinated. We have a history of Crohn's in our family. Like, I've got 2 autoimmune conditions. They should never have been vaccinated, and know that I'd have different children with different health issues if I hadn't rather. But no more vaccinations for sure. Poisonous.
And what's your advice to a new mum?
Just don't vaccinate, and then put that pause button on. If you're so afraid, like I was, to not get everything ticked in this little book, just put the pause button on it. Wait a year. Wait for something to come out. I'm looking to homeopathy.
Chuck it in the bin.
Yeah.
You don't need it.
No, you don't. And there's just there's such a community out there of people that are so knowledgeable. It's kind of ridiculous. You can put anything into Arnica or, these forums, or, just get your friends together who know about this stuff. And I find Arnica so helpful, even just doing the search on Arnica.
Okay, so you're talking about Arnica the remedy or Arnica the group? Arnica the group, sorry.
Okay. And Arnica, it's not kind of Arnica UK now because it's so global. It's just Arnica,
it's like look it up,
parenting, natural health or something like that. And you can even do searches to save yourself from asking a fresh question. That's really good, is you can type in like earache or whatever your specific issues that you're having, health issue you're having with your child or yourself. And you'll get all these, probably a question from maybe 2 weeks ago or a year ago, or they're asked constantly, so it's usually from like a week ago or whatever. Just have loads of questions, and then very knowledgeable responses from parents about that same issue that you're concerned about, and it's super helpful.
Should we go and sign Ali's card?
Let's go sign the card.
Go the Vaxxed card.
Can I put his nickname?
Yeah.
Jersey bonfire. Yes, he was born on the 5th of November. And I always say this, he's got red hair, so he's got like flame hued hair. But I always say now he's the one who led us to the light. And he is. Because of what happened to him. I wish it hadn't, but it like broke our whole world open and showed us the truth. Just so happy now that I've signed this car.